Hi, I'm Bridget Price,
And I'm Lauren Kemp.
and this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. We are welcoming our very first guest on today's episode. We are so excited to have and introduce Thomas Barr, Vice President of Business Development for Local First Arizona, a nonprofit organization dedicated to community and economic development throughout Arizona. He's joining us for a very important conversation around progressive business trends that have emerged and ways that we can continue to do business for good. So, Thomas, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and why this conversation is super relevant and important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Bridget and Lauren. This is exciting. I love these types of conversations and opportunities. Like Bridget said, I'm Thomas. I'm with Local First. I've been doing this work for about 8 years, but Local First Arizona has been an organization for about 19 years. Our founder started Local First in 2003, really to build awareness about the importance of how we spend our money and started building a coalition of family owned, locally owned businesses really so that people could connect to them. So that if you wanted to support a locally owned business, you could access them, you could support them. And so over the years, they, in the first 5 or 6 years, by doing some grassroots phone calls and building awareness as much as possible about the importance of supporting small businesses, they grew it to about a coalition of 800 businesses
Oh,
in just about five or
Wow.
6 years. As time continued to go on, I was brought on 2013. We had around 14 or 1500 businesses, and now we're at 3,500, and we're the largest local business coalition in North America. So the work that we're doing centers around the importance of supporting small businesses and providing opportunities and a voice for them. But actually, foundationally, the work that we're doing is much more than that. What we're trying to do is build a stronger Arizona economy. And that happens through investing in entrepreneurs. That happens in building opportunity for diverse communities to have access to building businesses for themselves and for their families. So today we have a staff of, we're going on 37 people that operate and provide services through a variety of programs that help build a stronger Arizona. And so we're super proud of the work that we do. Obviously, the last year has been pretty remarkable as far as what's been needed to support small businesses. But the conversation that we're going to have today, I think, is super relevant. I know we'll dig into it, but I think that it's really important that businesses consider that we're in the age of transparency. You can't just be a business, right? You have to fundamentally know what your values are and live them and communicate them and train your staff to know what they are too. And that is all really, really important in an age where if you do the wrong thing, you'll be closed tomorrow, right? There's the power of the consumer and of clients, right? That I think you need to really decide as a business, who are you, what is important to you, and how do you live out those values?
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
Lauren and I just recorded an episode on transparency last week, and our conversation was a little bit different around how we're transparent within our organization with our regard to our staff and employees. But we totally agree with you that being transparent as a company is something that is not a kind of a non-negotiable now. People really want to know who you are and what you represent as a brand and as a company. And it's no longer kind of turning a blind eye and just saying, I just care about the product or the service. I am invested in this company because I'm investing my hard-earned dollars. So we love that you mentioned that. We're super excited to have this
Yeah.
conversation. Very much needed. And I think it's just a conversation that's going to continue to evolve and it won't go away despite what some people might feel or think. So we're just going to go ahead and jump in. I know that over the last year, I think it's been super apparent how important it is to value your employees. We've seen a push towards kind of deeming our teachers, healthcare professionals, first responders as heroes, right? These essential workers, we finally have seen them, right? We recognize them. And now a lot of the conversation, even before the pandemic, has really kind of been shifting towards how are companies treating their employees. And then in turn, how are companies or how are employees, I'm sorry, discussing the organization that they work for. What trends, Thomas, have you seen, and Lauren, with businesses and employees, and their relationship, how it's evolved, how it's regressed, and kind of what the demands are in terms of feeling valued?
Yeah, I felt like, historically, there's always been this kind of cynical view of where businesses have taken advantage of their employees. That's just kind of the feeling that I had before going into entrepreneurship. And I had started seeing more of a change when I was hired at Salesforce, and they were like spouting and talking about how much they value their employees. And I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, they really, really focus on their employees' happiness and well being, and they had expanded benefits and all that kind of stuff. But Brian and I were talking about kind of why this shift happened. And I think part of it is because people want more work-life balance. People are just expecting more out of their jobs now. It's not just something that they go do for, 40, 60, however many hours a week, and then, go home and separate. People are looking to align their values with companies. People are looking for more purpose from their work. And then now it's almost like you should be treating your employees well to begin with. I feel like that should have always been the case. But now with the, advent of like Glassdoor, people can review what it's like being at your company. And I know when I was job hunting, one of the things I would do is, it's like they're reviewing me. I'm like, I'm also reviewing you. Like, do I want to work at your business? And it's almost like part of attracting great talent is you got to, treat them well too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, so true. I think also, it's your employees are your first customers. And so if you're a growing brand or I mean any business that's wanting to be in business, people are looking at how you treat those closest to you because that's going to tell you as a consumer how that business is going to treat you, right? If you are not taking care of the people that work for you, why should I give you my money, right? That type of mentality, I think, is really owned to this space of consumerism for the most part. And I think we're just seeing a natural generational shift in how companies decide to respond to that. And that's at a macro and micro level, right? We have super small businesses well known for being really progressive, treating their staff well, being a part of the community, and like they've built a following, right? And then you have large brands. And so that I think what it comes down to is how genuine it is, right? Is this just part of the PR strategy, or is this something that is well known that the company is actually doing to not just be good to their employees because they should, but is it really a part of who they are?
Lauren, I love the example of going to Glassdoor and reviewing because I think that speaks to the transparency that Thomas mentioned earlier. And if you're not going to be transparent, your employees are going to be transparent, and they're finally feel empowered to share this information, to share their experiences, and to either encourage or discourage people from working at this company that whose values are probably not aligned with what's going on in the current landscape. We've been challenging these antiquated ideas of being an employee, right? You spend a third of your life at work or something like that, and people are looking to get more than just a paycheck. They want wellness, they want perks, they want benefits that actually, support what they're bringing to the company. So, it's surprising sometimes to think that companies are still behind the boat on this. And we've seen the pandemic really shake things up, right? This whole idea of working from home seemed like a really nice benefit or bonus for like a tech company, right, in Silicon Valley, or even a small business here in Arizona. We know that they've been trending towards allowing like 1 or 2 work from home days or something of the sort, or some flexibility. But we realized in 2020, for a large majority of people, working from home is actually feasible, right? Really, how can companies really avoid having something like a pandemic that no one saw coming come in and allow them to be proactive in the treatment of their employees or with regard to progressive trends?
That's a good question. And I think we're not sure actually yet because we haven't yet seen the full transformation of fully returning to work, right? Some companies are, some companies have, some companies are just never going to. I think it's just going to be an incredibly mixed bag. Specifically speaking to the work from home, some industries it just makes more sense and it works better. Others, they're going to do half and half. I think at the end of the day, there's actually some people that enjoy the interaction more, right? Working from home also presents a variety of challenges, interactions, right? So I think to your point, I think the pandemic has kind of forced, how people do operate in different environments and not to force one structure. And so I think at the end of the day, we'll see more flexibility, which is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think that it's not a one shoe fit all type of thing. And you really have to figure out with the changes and the demands and the requests of people working, how can we figure out how to accommodate what's going on and not react to natural events that are beyond our control.
I think it speaks to as well the flexibility that people want in their lives. So for people to be able to take the time to go to the bank because it's only open during work hours, or go to a doctor or go to a therapist, and usually those are during the workday, for people to be able to feel like they can take that hour to go and do that without feeling the pressure from, their employer about working whatever the standard hours. It's just having that flexibility and that trust that, companies are now starting to put into their employees. I remember when I was talking to my manager once, I was like, oh, like, can I go look for an apartment? Like, we just moved to San Francisco for this job. And she's like, yeah, you're an adult. Like, if you get your job done, then yeah, go take that time off to do what you need to do for your life. Like, I think that that's kind of part of what work from home or just a flexible work schedule is people kind of loosening that grip a bit and trusting their employees more. I think, things like flexible work schedules, remote work, unlimited PTO, gym reimbursements. I'm seeing more mental health benefits, like people can get a few therapy sessions for free from their company. They're all like things that did not, I feel, exist previously, and now they're expanding to from companies to treat employees well, but also there's like, it's unique to their company values and culture. Like if they value mental health, they provide those mental health benefits and wellness that people want. I guess it's also people driven too. It's what do your employees say they want, and can you provide that?
Yeah, I've really been thinking about companies who have really been on the cutting edge of these progressive practices, maternity and paternity leave, right? But, a starting base salary. A company in Seattle several years ago kind of shook everyone to their core. He offered everyone in his company a base salary of $70,000. He's reported some interesting statistics in terms of how long employees have stayed, their overall happiness, production levels, things like that. And so, what does it take for a company, or I guess, what are your guys' thoughts on how companies lean into these progressive trends? I think Lauren and I, as business owners, that is naturally who we are. And for us, we view it as a way of life and a way of attracting top talent. But how can larger companies or companies who've kind of been, dated with doing things the traditional way kind of break out of that and lean into these progressive practices?
That's the $1 million question, right?
Like, how do you decide that you want to offer maternity leave, right? Is it something that you talk to, amongst your leadership, or again, feedback from employees? Like, how do you decide and think about these offerings just falling back to the status quo?
So I think it starts way, several steps back before like the what, right? Like, what are we going to offer? What are we going to do? And it's why are we even in existence? Why is this business even here? And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about how the founder of Lunchables has had like huge regrets.
Oh.
Because no, listen. So they started this company because they wanted to figure out how they could get vegetables in in the most streamlined way, manufactured and out to kids in schools. And I mean, arguably, they did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the overall effect and impact of that food on kids, it's actually like not good for them, right? And could have or contributed to health like habits, right? In eating poorly that has like a negative impact. And so he came out and said, you know, we've had a lot of regrets for like actually doing this because while we were trying to feed kids, we ended up like causing more problems than we were trying to solve originally. And so I think that operational conversation to begin with of like why is your business even here is where a lot of companies are have been evaluating themselves, and then what that leads to is who they are and what they're going to do with that. And so I think the what comes way after the business, like why are we actually here, who are we serving, and how are we serving them, and then that translates out into what they're going to do in the community or what actions they're going to take to lead through those values.
I think that's a great point. And speaking to the what part about like what we're going to do, I feel like when Brian and I were coming up with like what is our benefit, our salary and pay structure and all of that, it starts with empathy. It starts with remembering what it was like, you know, for us when we were employees at all these different places we've worked at and what we didn't like and what we did like, and seeing examples from other companies who are doing things that inspire us, that we want to copy, that we want to join in that movement. So it shouldn't always have to come from employees asking for it. I think that often business owners and entrepreneurs, we actively have to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, and we actively have to put ourselves in the shoes of our employees and remember what it's like to be in both those positions and how would we want to be treated. It's like, you know, if someone's not performing well, if that was you at a job and your boss is coming to speak to you, how would you want to approach that? And it's not as natural as I would wish it were. Like, I will admit, Brian and I have had to like take a beat, reminding yourself to take those steps back and put yourself in the shoes of others before deciding necessarily what's best for the business, but what's actually best for your customers, what's best for your employees, because that usually goes hand in hand with what will be best for your business.
Yeah. And, you know, even though the Lunchables CEO has regrets about kind of how or the form or shape that his business took, I think it's very important for companies to realize that even if you didn't get that fundamental, like, why and what are we doing this for before getting to all the other what's, that it's okay to pivot, right? I think we don't encourage that enough, that once you recognize a shortcoming or a flaw of sorts, you can go back and reassess and re-examine and change some things. Actually, if you are a successful company or business, can attempt at the very least to right those wrongs or fix those regrets. Because quite honestly, based off of his intent, it sounds like, you know, Lunchables, they didn't know what they know now. So when you know better or when you know to do better, and that ultimately I think is, I think an attitude that companies should take on. They were leaning into just making money, right? Laura and I joke all the time about we want to be hella rich. You know, when are we going to actually make sure that foundation is laid, right? We don't want to get so far beyond our personal goal that we neglect to define our business goals and our impact in the community and our customer base and our employees. So I'm a firm believer that if you can identify you're wrong, you can definitely go back and attempt to make it right or make some improvements there.
So I just smile every time we talk about Lunchables because I had like such a positive like feeling
Right.
about
Yeah.
them as a child.
Right.
I got my Reese's peanut butter cup. I got my Capri Sun. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
terrible for me, but like I look back on that time very fondly. So
It is nostalgic. It is so nostalgic.
Oh man, yes, you had to have the pizza one for your field trips, or else,
Yeah.
no.
Oh no, I was the ham, cheese, and Ritz cracker Lunchable. That was my jam.
Yeah. Those were always a classic. Those are always a good one. So, but yeah, I think that the what and how we do this kind of leans into make sure that people are building this company culture, transforming this culture from the inside, making sure that's also leading at the forefront versus, exactly what you're trying to provide for the masses or your consumer base. I think a lot of companies, unfortunately, all the time really consider the impact of company culture because you have people who are working for you or with you. They can reverberate your message to their circles and to the community. And like you mentioned earlier, Lauren, going to the glass door, that is, kind of showcasing what the culture is like. If it's toxic, if it's motivating, inspiring. And I think that small businesses have always led the way in terms of trying to create an intimate, full company culture, right? Because they're grinding it out. They're usually operating lean. And those small businesses, like you mentioned, Lauren, you and Brian are sitting down talking about what you didn't like working at a big organization or company and what you want to do differently or what you did like and how you want to pull that over. I feel small businesses have always led the way in how they shape company culture and how people want to be treated ultimately.
Thomas, do you have any that come to mind of small businesses you've worked with over the years at Local First and any like unique things they've done as far as giving back to the community or shaping their company culture?
Yeah, I always think of my friends Matt Clyde at Ideas Collide. They're a marketing firm in Scottsdale, and he does a lot of speaking. And company culture isn't tables and beer kegs, and quite frankly, that's not what it is at all. It's the relationships that you build among the people that work with you within the company or within the community. And so they've just really done a great job of positioning themselves as a partner in the community and not just a business. Like, yes, they're a business, they get paid to deliver services, but they've done a really great job of establishing themselves and working with community organizations throughout the state that I've seen to just do good work. One of the things that we worked with them on is, so last year during the pandemic, we were, measuring different data and different things happening among consumers. We noticed in May 2020 that people were shopping online more than ever before for everything, and also just buying things online, not only things they didn't need, but things that they needed and things that they would regularly pay for in person. All of these companies are shifting to virtual purchase orders. So we sat back and we said, okay, how does this play out for small businesses that don't have such sophisticated platforms or aren't, participating in some of the super large marketplaces that are out there? And so I called Matt and I said, what can we do about this? And we sat down and we said, we should build a marketplace. We should build a local marketplace for businesses. I said, okay, let's do it. And so over the course of about 5 months, we worked together on it. And in November, right before the Black Friday, Small Business Saturday kind of holiday shopping spree on the Monday before, we launched the Shop Arizona Marketplace. And it's a one-stop shop. It's a place that you can go find Arizona small businesses selling items, gift cards, experiences, and you can know that when you shop there, you're supporting a local business rather than just shopping anywhere online and not being really sure. And all of the business, 100% of the sales go straight to the business. So if you're shopping on an Amazon or whatever, there'll be money that doesn't go right to the business, right? And so it's really cool. And I just tell that story because that's the type of company Ideas Collide is
Yeah.
They come up with solutions and solve problems. And I think that's what culture is. It's what are you doing? What are you actually doing to be a part of the community?
I like that. I think this, idea of culture kind of segues nicely into how businesses are giving back to the community, because now we're starting to see that being baked into the culture of the business and even their business model. Like with Tom Shoes, when you buy, some shoes, they donate some shoes. So we're seeing different ways of businesses giving back to the community. So whether it's pulling together, a bunch of businesses in Arizona, or allowing employees volunteer time off, I've noticed a trend, at least, of businesses giving back to their community, not because it's a PR stunt, which I feel like has been that way in the past, but
Yeah.
they're actually starting to bake it into their processes, definitely emphasize it more in their culture.
Yeah, I think obviously giving back has been like a cornerstone for companies and businesses. Also, there's always good and bad. There's always been personal ties to companies in terms of like who they give back to, or who they invest their community dollars into. And so now I think that, again, just in the art of being transparent, in the culture of being transparent, consumers are also inquiring about actually what do you do at that level, and how do you actually give back to the community. Is it just by donating money? Are you donating time? Are you donating resources? And are you consistent? We've seen companies do like these annual galas or drives, and then sometimes they fizzle out. Like they'll skip a year, and then 2 years, 3 years, and you're like, hey, didn't this company used to do this golf tournament? What happened to that? And so I think sometimes if you're going to be philanthropic, it's important to be very transparent about what you're doing and to maintain that level of consistency. We know that things happen, right? Maybe the person who was in charge of that drive is no longer with the company and they've decided to go a different route. But if you've had people who are invested in that and show up every year, and then it doesn't happen one year, what do you do now? So, Thomas, have you seen outside? I think the Ideas Collide example is really great in terms of like what they pulled off essentially in such a short period of time, right? To get a marketplace up for these local businesses in Arizona. What have you seen across the board within the small business community, and how they, despite just growing their customer base and just starting out, or even just trying to level out a very top heavy kind of big organization competitive landscape, how do they still find ways to be philanthropic and give back, especially maybe what we've seen over the last year or so?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember that of businesses in Arizona, 99% of them are small businesses. And that's pretty true across the country too. The majority of firms of any business is actually a small business. And that's pretty true across the country too. The majority of firms of any business is actually a small business. And they're typically the ones to give first, and then not be sought after to be given to. I'll give an example, and then I'll answer your question. So,
No, you're
so
good.
we often think of, when we have something that we need, who are those businesses that we can easily connect with, that we could ask. So you might think about, maybe it's the cafe down the street to offer a gift card or scheme or whatever it is, right? Because those are people in the community, and we know that they'll show up. And there's a story. So we all know Bash's is a locally owned grocery store here. They also own Food City and AJ's. A lot of I would say most people know that. Not everybody knows they're locally owned. And an older story is a woman was going to Bash's and saying for her t-ball team, hey, would you sponsor our kids team? And is able to walk in and talk to somebody that's right here in the community. And yes, of course, but I can't do it all, right? I can do the snacks, I can do the food, whatever, but we can't do the kids' drinks or whatever. And so, grateful. She says, thank you so much. The manager says, so, while we can't provide the drinks, would you still like us to get them together for you or anything like that? She says, oh no, I'll just get those at Costco. And so you think about the dynamics of that, right? The locally owned business that's in the community is right here saying, here, we'll give to you, but we often forget to go back and give to them, and think about how the economy actually circulates back, right? And so I see local businesses giving and giving and giving all the time. There's restaurants I've spoken to, locally owned ones, that have told me they get asked at least 50 times a month. They'd be asked to donate a gift card, and they want to give, and a lot of them give all the time, whether it's those kids sports teams or high school clubs who are needing things for a silent auction, or nonprofit organizations hosting silent auctions, trying to raise money. And most of the time, majority of it is made up of small businesses trying to give back this, right? And they're trying to run their business. And so I honestly think it happens more often than we recognize. I think the majority of small businesses are giving back all the time.
Yeah.
That's such a great point, because we don't see it because it's all the big companies that get the press releases and the news coverage, and you don't always hear about this, all these small businesses doing all this philanthropic work, because it might not be as much money or as big of an impact. But man, that the school sports teams one hits home for me. I've definitely had to sell the coupon books and raise money for sports teams, and it's the local businesses that help support that. So
I remember when I was in school, I was interning, and I was also trying to figure out my way, like if I wanted to do PR or marketing, and trying to find some things out. And I came across a young boy who had a rare disease that he didn't have any of his limbs, but he was just the cutest thing and super just encouraging. And I talked to his mom, and I just wanted to help, and I was like, we should definitely raise awareness to this disease and figure out a way to give back. So I came up with this idea for like a drive, and I instantly did turn to those smaller businesses without even thinking about it, because for me at the time, kind of just college student, nobody, I didn't have the confidence to approach, or even a know-how to approach these bigger organizations and ask for a donation, right? But I could walk into this neighborhood store or this small business and talk to the owner directly and have more of an impact there, and get further than trying to go up the chain with these large corporations where there's all these gatekeepers. And it's funny because you're right, they are more eager to sit down and talk to you. They want to know what the cause is. They want to figure out how they can support, even if it's not monetary. Hey, you can hang some things up here. We'll donate a percentage of the proceeds of a sandwich or something of the sort, or baked goods. And I think that most people feel the same way. Like we've been asked, my husband and I, to donate to various causes because our friends know about us, right? And so we come top of mind, versus, again, kind of going towards these huge organizations where you really don't know anyone.
And usually there's no way to even go up the chain. It's like a form on a website, right? It's like, submit your information
and they tell
here.
you it'll
see what happens.
Yeah. And it's like 6 to 8 weeks, and then 8 weeks have passed and you don't hear from them. And but yes, and even to your point, Lauren, there is a strategy there in terms of brand recognition, right? These companies bake in this kind of press around their philanthropic efforts over the course of the year, and they know it's going to get media hits. They know that they're doing this to put their name out there so they can get more business. And smaller businesses are just really focused on trying to grow and survive and get through each year, and don't have the same capital or resources as some of these big organizations do. Thomas, have you seen a shift with kind of the way small businesses give back, and that actually inspiring some of these larger organizations and how they choose to give back?
A little bit. I mean, we could even think about what happened after the pandemic and what we saw businesses doing. I mean, there were some businesses that were able to, figure out pretty quickly. We saw a lot of our distilleries and breweries shift to actually making hand sanitizer when the supply was really low. And I remember Oso Distillery was working directly with Banner Health, and they were making barrels of hand sanitizer and exclusively getting it over there. Things like
Wow.
that. Things like seeing there's a small coffee and crepe shop called Colados Coffee and Crepes in Goodyear, and they were showing up at the hospital out there every day with free coffee and crepes for the nurses that were working. So just I think it's the nimbleness and the ability to do things quickly that has the envy of large corporations, because it's easier to turn a small ship around and say, okay, let's do this now, than a big ship that's got to figure out all of the ways that they're going to maneuver to change. And so I think it's inspiring to see how quickly small businesses are able to help when there's a need, right? There's also a story of when, I don't know if you've ever heard the story of Whole Foods when they first opened in Austin. Obviously, they're a big company now and owned by Amazon now, but when they started, they were a single grocery store, and it was a community-led effort. I don't remember if they were employee-owned or not. I don't think so, but they were focused on having a strong employee staff culture. And they worked really hard to pay their employees well, very different than other grocery stores. And what ended up happening was a storm came through and flooded the city, and their grocery store was ruined. They were completely flooded, and the two owners were just like, there's no way we can come back from this. They had inventory ruined, and they were just like, they showed up to clean up, but we're just like, this is it, we can't go any further. And what ended up happening is, because of how ingrained they had put themselves in the community, people just started showing up to help them clean the store. And they were just like, this grocery store is so important for the neighborhood that we don't want to see it go away. And like, people stood up, showed up, contributed. Super inspiring, right? And so I think when small businesses position themselves in the community in a way that the community knows how important they are, that then what ends up happening is, when that business is in need, the community shows up for them too, because they know how important it is. I like to think about it like this, like I use Changing Hands as an example. If Changing Hands tomorrow was just like, things aren't going well, what if there was a flood at Changing Hands? I can guarantee you people would be like, no, you're not closing. Like, let's figure this out, because of how connected they've made themselves in the community. So I think it's important that we, as just people that are here, remember those things before disaster happens, and stands up and thinks about how we need to be supporting those businesses before they're in a really desperate situation.
How do businesses get involved with the community? Because I'm thinking, like, especially what if your business doesn't have a storefront? How are you able to connect with the community without it always just being giving away money?
Yeah, I think the B2B question is super interesting, right? Like, if you're a business that serves other businesses or works with other businesses, not necessarily consumer facing, how do you do that? I think you get connected. You find other like-minded businesses around you that have similar values, that care about whether you're passionate about homelessness and solving homelessness, or children. I think you just need to align yourself with other people and businesses in the community that care about those things, and come together and work on solutions. There's a guy that owns a payroll processing business up in North Phoenix, and actually what he does is, every client that he brings on, he commits to donating 20% of all of the transaction fees that they have to collect from every time a card is swiped to the nonprofit of the business's choice. So if you're a business, say you just open up a restaurant and you call this company, they're called Next Gen Partner Strategies, and you say, hey, I need somebody to help me run my credit cards. They'll set them up, and they'll say, okay, so 20% of all the fees we're going to give to a nonprofit. Who do you care about? And then they'll make a recommendation. But usually, most of the time, people have a nonprofit they care about, or one that that they're close to. And so it's a cool way that he's been able to position himself to say, awesome, we want to work with you, but also we're going to do this for you. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Supporting the causes that you care about is definitely something that we're seeing more and more of with businesses, and encouraging their employees to also, speak up about their values, the causes that they care about, and empower them to, start drives or, organize around a cause. And this is something that businesses didn't talk about as much previously. I think that when it comes to, and I'm speaking more when it comes to social movements and things more political in nature. So previously businesses, it was taboo. You don't speak about politics. You don't speak about social movements or anything semi-controversial because you're afraid of losing business. But really, they've always been involved in politics because it just happens through influence or behind the scenes with money. But now companies are starting to speak up more. Their employees are definitely starting to speak up more, especially with social media. Is that something you're seeing with small businesses in Arizona or in general?
Yeah, I think businesses use whatever channels they naturally gravitate to communicate. We actually encourage that. There's a lot of businesses who have a great story or have a great reason why they're in business. And actually need to more so be telling that story. There's a auto and tire company called JD Tire Pros in Arizona, and when we started working with them years ago, you go to their website, it says what they do. We sell tires, we change oil, all that stuff. But the reason that company actually started is because the owner's son was killed in an automobile accident because the tires on the opposite car were worn out and caused the accident. And so the reason he's actually in business is to provide peace of mind for your family. That when you go out on the road, they've taken care of you, and you have somebody who's going to take care of you because they've gone through something really traumatic, right? All of a sudden, it's just like, take all of my money, I'm a customer for life, right? Rather than, okay, you're $1 more on your oil change than the guy down the street, right? All of a sudden, there's an emotional connection. And so whether that's your website, whether that's social media, however it is, elevating that story, elevating why you care, and why you're in business is really important.
Yeah, I think it's so important to share the why, especially around those causes and your values, because it's one step to say what they are, but going that level deeper and explaining why it's important to you, like you said, creates that emotional connection.
Yeah. I think that's another progressive trend that we're seeing, right? Companies cannot tell their consumers what they don't or do not, what they do or don't stand for. People want to know. And whether or not you tell them, they're going to find out. And it may not happen overnight, it may not be immediate, but once they do, if it's not aligned with their values and their beliefs, you will probably lose them as a source of business or a customer. I think in terms of holding larger companies accountable, even small businesses, it's really important that as a consumer, you do challenge them and ask for that transparency or demand it, right? Because we live in a day and age where we want to be conscious of what we pay for or where our hard-earned money is going. And I think what we've seen over the course of the year specifically is really pulling that philanthropic type of stance. Like, okay, it's great that you donate money here, but what are you doing when XYZ happens? Coming up in the workforce 10 years ago or so, you start seeing this shift. A lot of the companies I worked for in the Phoenix Valley promoted and encouraged support for the LGBTQ community, right? We stand for one, everyone can be hired, we don't discriminate, and we're seeing that shift, right? But there are certain topics that a lot of companies weren't really keen on speaking about, or like you said, Lauren, just felt taboo to talk about, right? You didn't want to scare away your customer base. You didn't want to appear political, even though we all are. Being in community, you are political, whether or not you realize it. And people kind of played it safe. Seen over the last year with these social protests is that it's harder to do that now, right? Like, you can't have a huge monumental moment take place and then you not say anything. And it's really challenged a lot of organizations to speak out about where they stand. I have an idea of kind of what's been behind this driving force of like finally, you know, identifying where you are in these historical moments. What are your guys' thoughts on the driving force behind small companies and large companies finally letting their consumers know who they are and what they value?
I think it's because it's been happening for a few years now. So I think that it's less taboo by the time we got to, the Black Lives Matter protests. Like, companies speaking out, I feel like it kind of started with gay rights, and now, like, it's not as taboo to talk about. I mean, it still can be. Like, there's still plenty of people who say businesses should stay out of politics, that you shouldn't speak up or make a stance. There are plenty of businesses that don't want to. I think that trend had already started, like, a few years ago, and it's continuing to trend that direction. I think people feel more comfortable or confident in making stands than they would have been 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But this is a hypothesis.
I think just what it comes down to is businesses have power, and the owners of those businesses can choose to use that power or not, or use it for good, or use it for bad. And I think we're just seeing those with influence within these businesses decide that they want to use it for good, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that the driving force, I think to your point, Lauren, has been the sustained efforts of these movements, right? The Black Lives Matter movement and everything that took place last year is not a result of them coming together after May 25th, 2020, with the death of George Floyd. It's the sustained efforts that have taken place since the organization was founded in 2013. And so you have moments in time where they're kind of undeniable. And I think a lot of people felt like that moment was undeniable, right? There's the impact of social media, impact of being able to share what was happening on this larger scale that we haven't always seen before. And it is ultimately now becoming an extension, like businesses are an extension of who you are, specifically small businesses, right? You and Brian sit down and identify your values and what you believe in and how you want to lead. I've always felt that as a small business owner, who I am at the core will always come through in my business. It's almost like, as much as you want to separate the two, it's hard to do that. And I think when you're younger, you want to kind of hide yourself in a sense because you want to appear bigger than what you are, right? You want to appear above it all, and you just want to focus on your business. But now I think the trend is that, again, businesses do have that power. They can evoke change. And also, to that extent, Thomas, the power, there comes a responsibility, a social responsibility beyond providing what you think is a valuable service or product offering, to truly giving back to the community and showing up for the people who represent that community.
I think a lot of these things have come together. It starts with, people wanting to know companies' values, and it starts with, companies starting to speak up over years, and it's an accumulation of all of these trends coming together to basically having businesses care more about the social good that they do in the world. It's not just about maximizing profit and pleasing shareholders anymore. It's, how can we actually give back in the world? How can we do something good for the community? You know, you see the movement with sustainability, you see the movement with diversity and inclusion, you see it in marketing with having diverse, you know, models for different brands, the transparency. I feel like all of it is because of this mindset shift into caring more about employees and caring more about the community and caring more about customers and being less focused on just your business, and realizing that because you have that power and influence, you do have a greater responsibility and you can use that to do good in the world beyond just your world.
Absolutely. Thomas, how has your experience been with small businesses in terms of owning that responsibility and leading the way with regard to, you know, obviously showing up in their communities, but showing up for their constituents and the people who invest in their brands?
Trying to think of another example. I think of Arizona Wilderness Brewing. They're a really, really just mindful company that not only is community focused, but they focus a ton of their efforts on environmental sustainability. And everything from where they source every product that you consume in their stores to being 100% compostable with all of their food waste and waste in general. These are things happening in the background that you only know if you care, right? And they're definitely elevating that they do it. But talking with the owner, he knows that not everybody goes to Wilderness because of those things that they do. Actually, probably a smaller percentage of people go there because of those things than do go there for those actions and commitments. But they're still committed to doing it because they care about it and it's important to them. So, while we'd like to think that businesses in doing good will be recognized for it, a lot of the time, it's work in the background that's really hard that doesn't get the recognition or the return. And I think that that's the difference. It's not a quick win. It's a long-term plan.
On that long-term plan, I have to say that in the summer of 2020, with all the protests and things happening, that was one of the things I was a little leery about. I love seeing the support. I love seeing companies basically get on board and say Black Lives Matter, right? There's an understanding here that there is some type of gap in terms of treatment and inequities and inequalities. So how are we going to address that? However, I was concerned that a lot of companies were just kind of jumping on this bandwagon and really curious about what they're going to do behind the scenes and really build out this long-term strategy. Are you saying these things because you don't want to get canceled? Or are you really invested in trying to embody this change? Have you recognized that there is this issue in our society, and are you really willing to do your part and be responsible and moving the needle forward? I think it's still a little early to tell, obviously, but I think it's important to have these conversations around businesses holding other businesses accountable for, sharing this brunt of responsibility, right? And have you seen any conversations amongst businesses, Thomas, with regard to working together, coming together, and really tackling like systemic and systematic inequalities throughout the state?
Yeah, many are doing it in different ways. And I think that it's important that businesses understand where they are on their own journey in understanding the issues, and then figure out what the best steps are for them to play a role in the movement. So, for example, there was a group of businesses, mostly white owned, that had come to us last year and said, we really want to do something for the Black Lives Matter movement. We're thinking of making a t-shirt. And we said, that's great that you want to do something. Congrats for getting there. Maybe consider the impact that a t-shirt would have versus, and maybe not versus, but also, what products do you have in your stores? Do the products in your stores mostly serve to white clients and white customers? Or might you think about how you can actually better serve more diverse people through your establishment? And what type of impact that would actually have on this issue, right? And so I think it's not being defensive, but being open to understanding that while well intended, not everything you do is going to be the right thing, and you've just got to be comfortable in that discomfort. And that's both in being a person and in being a business. And in this age of where you do one wrong thing and you can be canceled overnight, I think that we've got to you need to be careful as a business for sure, because you do that wrong thing and seen by many it will be very quickly. So I think you need to be really intentional. You need to listen. You need to engage in the right ways in order to help the ways that I think would be most helpful.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point about being intentional and kind of thinking about support critically, having a long-term plan. Because you're right, like if you make a mistake, and we're all human, we make mistakes. If you don't know better, then we know better, and then you can do better. But if you don't know, then it's gonna happen. As entrepreneurs, it feels like you're failing a lot all the time. Yeah. So it's a very scary thought, especially when you have employees, and like it's not just about you. Like if you're getting canceled, it's how am I going to continue supporting my employees if all of a sudden we can't make sales anymore? So I think it's definitely one of those things where you do have to be intentional. You do have to think about it a little bit more critically, but I don't want to be afraid, to take a stand if it's very important to you and it's something that you want to speak up about. It's just a tough position for business owners to be in.
It's almost like I think all companies have to take stock of everything that's going on around them, right? They have to consider who they are as a company, why they exist, understand what they're going to provide, how they're going to provide, what they're going to communicate to their employees, the community, the people who support them, and then making sure you also take stock of the landscape and what's going on in the world around you. I think what you point out, Lauren, is as small business owners, we're kind of in our bubble sometimes, trying to navigate growing our businesses and figuring out everything and also being well intentioned, but we don't always feel like we have the time to answer these questions or think about it. But I think now, again, we're kind of left with no choice, and instead of reacting to these events, we can be proactive and or already lead in this way. So it's natural, and I think people are going to have questions, people are going to have doubt, but yeah, I think that we have to think about everything from a full lens. We're a cleaning company, my husband and I, and so we have to think about things like sustainability and using eco-friendly products and moving away from things that harm or damage the environment. And I have to say, despite my personal beliefs around the environment and us needing to, move away from global warming and address those issues, in the million years, I never thought my business would have to be thinking about these things, you know what I mean? And how we can do our part and own that responsibility. So I do think it's about really, again, taking stock, assessing everything that you have going on in the business. And sometimes it's not as simple as just thinking or acting selfishly or just for your self-interests.
Well, I think the good part too is that there are a lot of companies that can be your example. Thomas has shared many great examples of how companies are, incorporating their business practices for social good. So it's not something that you necessarily have to start from scratch and figure out on your own. Like, what companies inspire you? What are the things that they're doing that you also would like to do within your business? I think that's a good place to start. What are the trends that you're seeing that you want to do as well, which is what has been the driving force for me and Brian to figure out how we're going to do things. We look at the companies that we think, hey, I think you're doing something good here, and that should be the way things should be done moving forward. And that's how change will start to happen. So I think it's such a tough conversation because, things that, we might think are for the social good and that should be done is not something that is necessarily agreed upon by everyone.
Yeah.
So,
but there are universal moments, right? And I think COVID-19 was that universal moment. Regardless of where you stand on terms of like how we go about handling it, right? I think we all felt the impact of COVID-19, whether that was through quarantining or, people falling sick or businesses being threatened in some capacity, right? We've experienced loss during this time, and that has pulled people together. We've recognized these essential workers. We've recognized, the struggle that businesses and small businesses are faced with. And how do we continue to support small businesses after the pandemic is over, right? Because we clearly see how close they were to some of them to crumbling, because the way small business support is set up, something like a pandemic can completely wipe them out. That's beyond their control. So these moments are universal, and they allow people to come together and support each other and really build. And how do we take this moment and prepare and continue to launch into this new wave of doing business for good, right? And not just doing it for the time being. I think a lot of companies are really going to start thinking about that and leading with that.
I think that's a great point to end on, is how can we support small businesses moving forward through this pandemic?
Yeah, so it starts with simple things, right? How do you spend your money? And I mean, that's why we were started. Can you go to a local business first? Can you try to find one first? You might not be able to, but whether that's your food or your haircut or your oil change or going to the movies, that's kind of where it starts. And then from there, it's thinking more broadly about, how all of your dollars impact the community. Are your dollars being deposited? Are you working with a bank that is not in Arizona, that is headquartered somewhere else and very large, or are you working with the local loans to other small businesses in the community? And would your dollars better be served community bank that actually is focused on providing, a strong business here, or is it being sent somewhere else? So there's lots of fundamental things that you can consider doing depending on where you're at, right? That will have big impacts in the community. But I think the most important thing is to make an effort. Think about the ways that you can. It's not always just gifts, right, that you can go local for. That's a great way to do it. But it's a lot of the things that we spend money on every day that you can consider.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I would say as an entrepreneur, one of my goals this year is to definitely get back out into the community, work with other entrepreneurs, network. That's something that when you're in their bubble and you're trying to grow and thrive, you miss out on. And given the pandemic made that a bit challenging, but that's definitely something that I plan to do, because I think small businesses supporting other small businesses can also add to that impact as well.
Absolutely.
All right, well, this wraps up our episode for today. I really hope you guys enjoyed our conversation. We really enjoyed it. Be sure to like, subscribe on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all the things. And thank you for joining us today, Thomas. We really enjoyed you.
Thanks so much for having me.
And everyone check out Local First Arizona.